Hey, I'm Brian, and before getting in my iPhone 12 mini next week when you're watching this, get subscribed so you don't miss that, I still have some time to test another phone. Let's see if the OnePlus 8T can convince me after my time with the Pixel 5. Look, I got a haircut. The design is pretty much a crossover between the OnePlus Nord and the OnePlus 8 series. It's glossy, like the OnePlus Nord, but the color is more similar to the OnePlus 8 and 8 Pro. That means that in bright light it does look very similar to the OnePlus Nord in this light blue color, and what OnePlus is saying in regards to fingerprints is true. Despite it being glossy, it doesn't really attract any fingerprints. I still do think that the matte back of the 8 and 8 Pro looked a lot more premium than this though. I also really don't like that they have to follow the herd and put the camera as a square in the top left now. I prefer what they did before with a smaller module in the middle. It does keep the matte aluminium frame from the 8 though. And this is still a big phone, no doubting that. What I did notice having used the Nord last is that the alert slider is a lot more clicky than on that phone. And handy as always. I still wish I could remap it though. When watching the news in the morning, I appreciated the good speakers. The top one especially is a lot louder than the Pixel, for example. Unfortunately, the 8T doesn't have any certification for water resistance, but because it still has all the seals and stuff, you probably don't have to worry about getting caught in the rain, which gets more and more likely now that we're coming into autumn. The 6.5-inch 1080p display is actually the same as on the 8, just flat and with a higher refresh rate. I do appreciate that they did get rid of the curved edges, especially because on the 8 and 8 Pro, accidental touches were a huge issue, especially at first, which I also talked about in my reviews. It does mean that the phone looks a bit less sleek with slightly more noticeable bezels, but that's a small pill to swallow, I think. The 120Hz refresh rate is nice, but the difference to 90 is pretty negligible in day-to-day use. Still, scrolling is super smooth, and if I can get 120Hz, I'll take it. What I also like is that OnePlus finally included an always-on display option. Better late than never. It works just as you would expect and shows you time, weather, calendar events and notifications just like on the Pixel. And it also leads to the fingerprint sensor under the screen being always active, so you don't have to tap the screen to activate it and can unlock it even faster. The sensor itself didn't really change, it's still super fast but not 100% reliable. OnePlus's super fast face unlock is also still on board. The 120Hz screen on this phone is nice and all, but it really doesn't feel that much smoother than 90Hz, and it does take a huge toll on battery life. That's why, as I've already said in my OnePlus 8 Pro review, I would really like OnePlus to include a 90Hz option in the settings, because that's a much better balance between smoothness and battery life. As it is, you get about 5 hours of screen on time on this phone if you charge it to 100%, and that should get you through one day, but if you only charge it to about 80%, then you might need to charge before the day is over. That's not bad, but it's not great either, and this battery life really does water down the super fast charging on this phone a bit. The charging on this phone really is super fast. You can get about 60 or 80% back in just 15 to 20 minutes of charging. And that means that you can top up the phone enough for the full day in just the time that it takes you to get ready in the morning. That's really cool. And it also means that if you quickly need to leave and you realize your phone is dead, you can just plug it in for 5 minutes and actually get a significant charge back. And yes, all of this does also make me feel a little bit less bad about the phone not having wireless charging. The internals of the 8T didn't change at all from the OnePlus 8. Same CPU, same storage options, so I think I can make this pretty quick. This is a super fast phone. OnePlus phones have been pretty much the fastest Android phones for a while. The 865 flies through apps and there are no stutters to speak of. But the difference to the OnePlus Nord that only has a 765 and a 90Hz screen isn't night and day. In fact, I would say it's only something to spot when putting them side by side. I'll tell you later what this means for a buying recommendation. The 8T of course also has 5G. It's not something that should make you buy this phone alone yet, but when you plan on keeping it for a couple of years, you will appreciate it. It really is a lot faster when it's available. The 8T does come with Android 11 out of the box, and that also means it's the first OnePlus phone to ship with their new OxygenOS 11 skin that isn't as close to stock Android anymore. I would say they're walking a very thin line here. The software is pretty much the only thing that sets OnePlus phones apart from their Chinese competitors. While the Pocos, Xiaomis and Oppos of this world have very heavy skins that bog them down and also don't look that appealing to most people outside China, OnePlus has always had a more tuned down approach. You can see some hints of this typical Chinese software styling creeping in with OxygenOS 11, but it really isn't that bad yet. Status bar, notifications, settings menu and app switcher remain largely unchanged, which is good, also for usability, and helps it to stay as smooth as it's always been. So despite being worried at first, I am happy to report that this is not the day OnePlus loses its software advantage. Let's hope it stays that way. I really have the same issue with the camera setup on the back of this phone as with the one on the OnePlus Nord, just even more extreme. There are 6 circles on the back of this phone, 3 of which are completely useless. You of course have your main 48 megapixel camera and your 16 megapixel wide angle, but then you have a 5 megapixel depth camera, a 2 megapixel monochrome camera, and 2 flashes, one of which I've never seen used, not in the camera app and not in the flashlight. And I really don't think there are a whole lot of people going like, well, I probably shouldn't buy the iPhone 11, I should rather buy the OnePlus 8T, because that one has twice as many cameras on the back, so it must be better. So I'd really like for them to rather spend this money on wireless charging or something like that, which this phone of course doesn't have again. But apparently I'm wrong, because manufacturers keep putting more and more cameras on the backs of the phones, so more cameras must sell more smartphones. At this point I'm really just kind of tired of this camera system. It's the same sensor as in the OnePlus 8, 7T, even 7 Pro. And the same goes for the ultra-wide camera. This wasn't a flagship camera 1.5 years ago, and something like that doesn't get any better when you don't improve while your competitors do. Don't get me wrong, in good light this is a good camera, even if it tends to overexpose and produce images that are too warm. The latter might even be a benefit if you take a lot of food pictures. But when the light gets worse, it just falls apart compared to something like the Pixel 5, which costs the same. It gets soft and starts to crush shadows. This is especially true for the ultra-wide sensor, the dynamic range of which is just not great. The night mode is fine, but nothing groundbreaking, and selfies share the same deficiencies as pictures from the main camera. Why didn't they put the great 32 megapixel selfie shooter from the Nord into this phone? I don't know. The only thing that saves it a bit is the video capabilities that are still pretty good, especially when it comes to stabilization. I actually went into this thinking that the OnePlus 8T would be pretty easy to recommend. As reviewers said, the 8 was too expensive, and this is 100 euros cheaper, has a 120Hz screen and faster charging. Lessons learned, easy right? No, it's not quite that easy. OnePlus just didn't really change that much recently. The fingerprint sensor is the same for years, and so are the design and camera. The 600 euro price segment has gotten really competitive lately, with stellar options like the Pixel 5 and S20 FE, both of which have better cameras, extras like water resistance and wireless charging, and in case of the Pixel 5, better endurance. The performance advantage, even over that 765 equipped Pixel 5, is pretty negligible, and I'm just not convinced the 65-watt charging is enough to make up for that mediocre camera, especially if it goes at the expense of battery life. And the 8T has another problem, and that problem's name is OnePlus Nord. The Nord gets you pretty much the same performance, screen, software, exactly the same camera, speakers. The only difference that really matters here again is that faster charging. And if I were you, I'd rather live without it and save 200 euros, or trade it for a better camera and other features with the Pixel 5 or S20 FE. By the way, if you like this sweater, then you can find it below. I mostly made it for myself, but I figured if I'm designing it anyway, then I can also make it available for you. I'm not really making a whole lot of profit off of it though. Thanks to OnePlus for the OnePlus 8T. Of course, all of my opinions are still my own, obviously. If you enjoyed this video, you know which buttons to press. Don't forget to press that follow button on Twitter, and don't forget your mask when you leave the house. I'm Brian, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.